You gotta love a great love song, don't you? What is it about a love song that just sort of resonates with our soul and connects with us? Well, it's probably because all of us long to connect with someone. All of us live with this hope that somewhere along the journey of life, we're going to find that one person. And we're going to connect, and we're going to get each other, and then our lives are going to become intertwined with each other. We all hope for that. I bet you every couple in this room who's married, who's dating, is engaged, you probably have your song. A song that you can look back and say, that they played that at our wedding. That was the dance that we first danced to at the club that one time when we first met. That's our favorite song. If you're here and you've lost a spouse, you probably have a song that was your song. And every time it comes on the radio or every time you have the courage to play it, it just brings back all those memories. It's your song. Some of you, you're single. You haven't met that special someone yet, but you have a song, and it describes a story about this is what I hope for, this is what I long for, this is what I dream for. We love a good love song. I've found that even the most macho, tough men, they have a favorite song. They might never tell anybody what that song is because they'd be embarrassed for people to know that they actually listen to Justin Bieber, right? But they love a song because it describes something that all of us long for. You say, Paul, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I really don't have a song. But you know what you do have? You have a story. Every single one of us in this room, you have a story. You know how I know that? Because the Bible talks about it. In the 139th Psalm, the author says this, your eyes, and he's talking about God, your eyes saw my unformed body. When I was just being conceived in my mother's womb, you saw me. You saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me. My entire life, my entire history, every single day, all the days that you have ordained for me were written in your book before one of them even came to be. Isn't that an interesting metaphor? That God, our Heavenly Father, He's writing a story about your life. And He knows the beginning from the end. Wouldn't it be interesting if we could all read each other's stories? I wonder how the story's arranged by chapters. Is it like the early years, the junior high school years? Is it the 20s and the 30s? But here's the deal. If we could read each other's stories, we would learn things about each other. I'd learn something about the socioeconomic background that you grew up in. I'd learn something about your parents, and your brothers and sisters, and your grandparents, and your aunts and uncles. I'd learn something about what family was for you. I'd learn something about like your ambitions, like the things you always dreamed of doing and accomplishing. I'd learn things about like your relationships, your friendships, and the people that you never got along with. We'd learn about your elementary school years, and we'd learn about your junior high school years, and your high school years, and your college days. We would learn like things, like way down underneath the surface, we'd learn things about like your political beliefs, your spiritual beliefs. We'd learn something about like what you think of television. Is it a waste of time, or do you just love binge watching your favorite show? We'd learn something about like how you interact with money. And if we read the story close enough, we'd learn something about your understanding of sexuality. What that is for you, what that means for you, and how that's shaped your life. And some of you, your story, it would be one of like a really healthy and positive experience. You grew up in a home where your parents did a really, really good job at preparing you for all of that. Like from the time you were just the littlest kid and they were teaching you like your body parts and what you kept private and what you didn't let other people, and they just did a good job of preparing. Then they had those conversations. They didn't have just the talk. They had the talks with you along the way to prepare you for that very special thing. And they equipped you with a sense of confidence and security so that you made good choices all through high school and college, and you saved yourself for that one person that you would get married to. And your experience has been good and healthy. And in a room like this, there's some of you and your story is painful. It's negative and it's really unhealthy. Maybe because your parents, they didn't help you one bit. In fact, maybe your parents were responsible for hurting you. And you grew up with a lot of confusion. And it created some needs and longings and urges in your heart, and you didn't know how to handle them, and you gave yourself away sexually many, many times to many different partners, and now you live with sort of the regrets of all of that. And then there's everything in between. A combination of good and bad, a combination of negative and positive. You say, Paul, is there a reason why you went there? Yeah, there is, because we're in a series called Love and War. If we're going to be honest to the topic about things that couples often talk about and argue about and fight about and don't get along together about, we're going to talk about sexual intimacy. But I want to begin with this, and that is, no two people united together in marriage have the exact same story. So he has one story and she has another story. He has one experience and she has another experience, and you bring them together in a marriage. And it's not surprising that at times people have a lot of difficulty in connecting with each other on this most intimate basis of sexuality. It's a problem in so many marriages. In fact, it's pretty normal that couples don't always see eye to eye and get along with each other about this very critical topic. And so for our series to be complete, we have to talk about this. And I can tell by your faces, you're like, really, can we just? No, we have to. Like, this is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about. Because I'm fascinated with, like, the enormity of the problem. So many couples tell the same story of frustration and resentment and disappointment and lack of communication and lack of connectedness. And I just like, that's so interesting to me. So I love this topic. You get nervous because you're not sure what I'm going to say. And here's what I'm going to tell you. I'm not interested in being sensational. I'm not interested in being provocative. I am interested in helping, and I'm interested in being honest. We're going to have an honest conversation about a few things. We can't talk about all of it, but just a few things. You know what I get most nervous about when I have, like, the opportunity to talk about this? I'm always nervous that I'm going to be, like, rolling along, talking, blah, 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 like I do, blah, 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 blah. And then I'm going to string a set of words together, not even thinking like of the double entendre. And so I'll say, like, so something comes up between the couple, and everyone's like, he said something comes up. I'm like, that's what I'm nervous about. And if you need some help explaining that one, it's going to be a long morning. but I think it needs to be talked about. Because here's the deal. If we don't talk about it here, where do we talk about it? Well, there's two options. We either don't talk about it, or we talk about it in all the places where we get a lot of misinformation. The church offers the safety and the grace to talk about like these really delicate topics from the perspective of God's help and God's hope. So I think the church has to talk about it. Especially if we're in a series called Love and War, where we're talking about the stupid stuff we fight about and what it reveals about our marriage. So here's where we've been so far. In week 1, we did a message called The Toilet Wars. We talked about, does the toilet paper go over or under? Does the seat stay up or down? And what temperature do you keep in the house? And why do we waste so much water? And why don't you ever turn the lights off in the rooms that we're not using? And all these preferences and things that we end up annoying. But how a couple negotiates different preferences reveals a lot about the amount of respect they have for each other. The stuff we fight about reveals the truth about our marriages. In the second week of the series, we talk about You're Driving Me Crazy. And we talk about couples just driving in cars together. And how a couple navigates the tension of stressful situations, which driving together represents one of the many stressful situations that we find ourselves. How we navigate stressful situations reveals a lot about the level of trust that a couple has in each other. And then last week, we talked about the money monster, because so many couples get wrapped around the axle when it comes to like, how do we talk about and deal with and handle finances? And I just want to remind you of a very important point that we made last week, is that mismanaged finances, in particular debt, is like carbon monoxide silently contaminating a marriage with toxic stress that ultimately suffocates a couple's love for each other, harmony with each other, and trust in each other. I just can't emphasize enough how important it is for a couple to be on the same page, working together, talking through how they go about handling their finances. And I just want to clarify something that maybe there was some confusion around last week. I'm not saying in any way, I'm not suggesting in any way that money is a bad thing. Money is a wonderful thing. It's a gift from God, a stewardship that he entrusts to our care to use wisely. Money is a good thing, but money with a sinful heart can create lots of problems like envy and jealousy and covetousness and greed. And when that infects a couple's relationship around the topic of money, then it leads to lots of arguments and lots of distance and lots of lack of trust. And so how a couple manages their finances reveals a lot about the level of unity, their togetherness, their commitment to doing life together that they have in their marriage. And so today, we're going to tackle this last topic, and it's called the naked truth. Seriously, it's a paradox to me. Couples fighting about sexual intimacy, one of life's greatest sources of physical and emotional pleasure. Like, it's hard to match something that compares to the emotional and physical pleasure of sex. Couples fighting about it, it's hard for me to reconcile. There was a day when you couldn't keep your hands off of each other, and now sexual intimacy has become this enormous source of disappointment and frustration and resentment, resulting in a paralyzing distance between two married people sleeping in the same bed. We have to figure that out. What is that revealing about our marriage? So if you give me a few minutes, we're going to talk about sexual intimacy. And you're like, do we really have to? My mom is with me today. Come on, we're all big people. Let's do this. What do couples fight about? We're not going to go in great detail here, okay? We fight about frequency. Like, how often should we have sexual intimacy with one another? Is it once a week? Is it 3 times a week? Is it once a quarter? Once every 3 or 4 years, whether we need it or not? I mean, what's frequent? Couples, he has one expectation, she has another set of expectations, a variety, changing it up from here and there, and what's accessible, permissible, what's everybody comfortable with? Duration, like how long does it last? she's like, you want to have a quickie? And he's like, they're all quickies from my perspective. Can we like maybe try something that lasts a little longer? Satisfaction, again, different understandings, different expectations, different definitions of whether in fact both partners are mutually satisfied with the experience, or is somebody just pretending and just sort of gutting it out and hoping that it'll be over soon. Romance, like that missing component of being romantic to lead up to the sexual experience. Affection, this is hugely important to women. And it's very different in its importance to men. So couples, they fight about that. The connection, the sense of like actually connecting in the experience and feeling like we're in this together and it's mutually satisfying and agreeable. These are the things that we fight about. And how can something so right go so wrong? Something so beautiful, something so perfect, something that God gives to us as a gift. Where does it go wrong? Well, actually, we could spend a year talking about that. There's a host of topics but here's just some of the common ones. Here's the ones that I run into most often, I read about in my research, the ones that I've talked to other people. Here's a list of just some of the most important ones, or common ones. Unrealistic or unfulfilled expectations. This is huge. He has certain expectations. She has certain expectations. This is often defined by our growing up experience. This is often defined by our dreams and our fantasies and these things that we always imagined marriage would be. And ladies, let me just tell you, you had a dream for your marriage. You had this idea of what your marriage would be like. And I'm telling you, your husband, he had dreams for his marriage too. They might look very different than your dreams, but he had dreams, hopes, the way that his marriage would be. It's oftentimes they never talk about it enough even before they get married, and it just leads to problems. The other threat here is pornography. A man or a woman who spent any time looking at pornography, it creates a sense of unrealistic expectations. There's no partner on planet Earth who will be able to satisfy like it's portrayed in pornography, because you know why? That's all fake. It's acting. It's edited. It's airbrushed. The models, the victims in pornography could not satisfy you like you think you could be satisfied if you were with them. It's not possible. These unrealistic expectations created by pornography often become a problem in a couple connecting around sexual intimacy. Lack of reconciliation. Sometimes the disinterest in sexual intimacy has nothing to do with sexual intimacy. It has everything to do with the stuff you've been fighting about now for 15 years, money and children and job and hobbies and all of these unresolved conflicts that you've never really done the work to say, I'm sorry, how can we avoid this the next time, and really work through an apology and reconciliation. And so partners aren't feeling particularly like making love to somebody because actually they're very angry and disappointed and mad at them. Scars from personal trauma. Again, people who have been hurt in this particular arena. It makes it really hard for them to trust, to give themselves freely, to relax and enjoy the experience because of the trauma and the memories that it brings up. Physical, psychological, and physiological changes. You know what this is? This is called aging. The older we get, all of that begins to change by things that we can't even control oftentimes, but couples, because they're not anticipating the changes and they're not talking about the changes in healthy and constructive ways, it ends up becoming a problem. Lack of open and honest communication about life in general, but about sexual intimacy. Some couples, they don't even, after 15, 20, 30 years of marriage, they still don't feel comfortable talking about it. And it leads to frustration and disappointment. And then the neglect of vital catalysts to intimacy. Like there's some things that a couple does that are catalysts to encouraging and supporting and nurturing sexual intimacy. And when you begin to neglect those vital catalysts, we shouldn't be surprised that we lose interest we're going to talk about that today. So here's a picture. Yeah, see, that made you nervous. That's not how I wanted that to be. Here's a metaphor. Real intimacy is a fire that you must tend if you hope for it to thrive. Today, I want to talk about sexual intimacy in that kind of an understanding. It's this fire that we have to do the work of helping to nurture and tend that fire in order for it to thrive. And the couple who neglects what it takes to nurture that fire, they're always going to run into problems. It's inevitable because intimacy is a fire. You say, okay, Paul, I get it that you're determined we're going to talk about sex today, but is there a Bible verse somewhere in this? Well, actually, there's lots of Bible verses because the Bible is very open and honest to talk about sexuality. We can't look at all of them. We can't talk about all of it. We're going to talk about two topics. We're going to look at two verses because they set the stage for the two topics I want to address. Okay, you with me? So look at this. Genesis chapter 2. We're 2 chapters into the Bible. And we read this. God's created the universe, starts to fill in all the creatures, creates the first human being, happens to be a male. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. Of all the creatures that God created, there were none that were uniquely compatible with the human being. And so the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep, and while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs, and then he closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. And the man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh. This is like me. This is a part of who and what I am, and she shall be called woman, for she has been taken out of the man." And this is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one. Now, this is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. Here's 2 human beings in the most vulnerable experience that people can be in, completely unclothed with each other, and there wasn't any fear, there wasn't any embarrassment, there wasn't anything awkward about it, there was no shame. You know why? Because sin had not yet contaminated the good thing that God had designed. Which tells me something, that God created this to be good and to be perfect and to be wholesome. That's God's design for human sexuality. Centuries later, we come to the New Testament. The writer of the book of Hebrews says this: marriage, the arrangement of a husband and wife making a commitment to each other, a vow to spend the rest of their life together, it's to be held in honor. It is a noble thing, and he's lifting it up and saying, Christ's followers, we should honor marriage. We should approve marriage. We should affirm marriage. It's a good thing. Marriage is to be held in honor among all. And the marriage bed, this is sexual intimacy, and the marriage bed is to be undefiled. Now, we would probably not use that word. Okay, that's not a word, but notice it's written in the book of Hebrews. This is unique. See, the book of Hebrews was written to Jews who had made a decision to follow Jesus Christ as their Messiah. So they come from this very Jewish lineage, this Jewish religion, this Jewish culture. And when a Jewish person saw the word defiled or undefiled, it held this very sacred significance. If you read through the Bible and understand Jewish faith and culture, they were meticulous about things being clean. Clean was about purity. Clean was about good and right and wholesome. That's why throughout the Gospels we see Jesus knocking heads with the Pharisees over things like washing their hands properly before they ate, because Jews were very committed to things that were undefiled. So the writer of Hebrews is saying sexual intimacy is to be undefiled. The word has the idea of without stain, unsoiled, it's pure. He's suggesting that sexual intimacy is a good and right and proper thing. There's nothing wrong with it. It is how God designed this very special relationship between a husband and wife. There is nothing immodest, there's nothing improper, there's nothing immoral about sex. And anybody who's operating with that sort of perception of sexuality is always going to bring a certain injury to the relationship with their spouse. They're working from a lie. They're working from a misunderstanding. There is nothing immodest, improper, or immoral about sex unless it is experienced outside of God's original design and purpose. Sex outside of the way that God intended it to be experienced and enjoyed will always break our hearts. It'll always leave scars on our soul. It'll leave us in the backwash of guilt and shame and frustration and disappointment. But in the context of a marriage relationship between a husband and a wife, a man and a woman, sex is God's gift. It's God's design, and it was intended to be enjoyed. Another translation of the verse that we just looked at, it says, the marriage bed is to be kept pure. So it highlights three things. Sexual intimacy is pure and proper. It's pure and it's proper. And God's design for it, his intentions for it is completely pure and proper. The purity of sexual intimacy, it can be defiled. It's not defiled unless somebody does something to defile it. Therefore, the purity of sexual intimacy must be protected in order to be preserved. We have to be very careful with it. So, sexual intimacy is a beautiful, an amazing, an awesome, a fun, a comforting, a reassuring, a pleasurable, satisfying, and energizing experience for husbands and wives to enjoy with each other. Why? Because God created sex to be enjoyed. And when it's not enjoyed in the context of a couple, it's indicating that something's not right. Remember? It reveals something. So we have to try to figure that out. So, of all the topics we could talk about, I want to just tend to two situations. Ready? You still with me? All right. So, two threats to sexual intimacy in marriage. Now, we could talk about 22 threats, but you won't stay that long. So, two. And these are two that I've identified as being the most common. Right? Two threats. Number one of the biggest mistakes many couples make in their marriage is reducing making love to having sex. Folks, I'm telling you, there's a difference between making love and having sex. Having sex is an act. Making love is a journey and an experience. And they're different. But when we reduce sexual intimacy simply to the act of intercourse, we have missed so much of what God intended for how it all works. It's just interesting in our vernacular. When we hear the word making love, most all of us think about having sex. Like that's what that means. But originally, that's not what that meant. Making love as a term, in its original meaning, it meant to pay amorous attention, to court, to woo. No, that's a silly word. We don't use that a lot, but it means to draw in, to nurture and cultivate and create some sort of environment. It was an Anglicization, say that a couple times fast, of the popular French saying, which simply meant to pay attention to someone romantically. It didn't have anything to do with intercourse. It was about paying attention and creating an environment, an atmosphere, an emotional setting for what might lead to intercourse. But to make love was to create a setting for it. Making love has a more literal meaning, referring to the strengthening feelings of closeness that often accompany acts of intimacy. The theist might refer to this as the spiritual dimension of sex, while the evolutionist might describe it as a cocktail of dopamine and endorphins. That sounds pretty romantic, right? Explain it however you'd like, but the point is, amidst a swirling blend of vulnerability and trust, Two people often feel a rush of heightened closeness, a feeling of intimate bonding. During sex, they are making love. That is, they are creating the feelings that often accompany emotional love. It's possible to have sex without vulnerability and trust. And I can tell you, at least one of the people in that experience is not enjoying it. Perhaps both. What God intended was this heightened sense of closeness, this act that brings a couple together and reminds them, oh, that's right, we are in this together. So here's the deal. Let's get really practical. You're like, oh, getting really practical. This is about making love. It's things like laughter together. It's about having fun with one another outside of a bedroom. It's about conversation, like talking about things that matter and mean something to us at a level beyond the surface. It's about connecting, like feeling like there's a connection there. It's about flirting. Why is it that we flirt when we date and then we get married and we stop it? It's talking about romance. That's things like cards and flowers and candles and romantic dinners and walks on the beach. That's an important part of what God intended to be the environment. Touching. It's amazing to me how many couples after 15, 20 years of marriage, honestly, they don't touch much anymore. Well, they run into each other while they're trying to get through the closet at the same time, but they don't move toward each other for that warmth and that sense of connection. I could. Don't you dare raise your hand. Don't answer out loud. But some of you who've been married a while, like seriously, when's the last time you felt the electricity of just holding your spouse's hand? Holding hands, kissing, like where does that stop? Well, it does for too many couples. Foreplay, intercourse, this is all the words you ever find, afterglow, whatever. I'm sorry, that's the term. You know what that is? It's about lingering afterwards. Instead of simply getting it done and being over with it and then getting out of bed to use the restroom and to go empty the dishwasher or go grocery shopping. Ladies, I'm telling you, you can't imagine how important this is to your husband. Like lingering there. Staying a while. Because when you get up and run off, it leaves him feeling incredibly rejected. It hurts his feelings. And when he's lived with that for years after years after years, don't be surprised that he's not so much for any of this stuff anymore because he's hurt. He's like, why bother? The most it feels like with her is it's an obligation that she has to accommodate me a time or two a month, but she's not really into it. But this is making love. All of this. And what's so disappointing or so frustrating for me as a person who's trying to serve folks is so many people, they just establish this is all we really do anymore, if that. And they neglect all of this beautiful, exciting, fun, and natural part of how God intended two couples light the fire and sustain it and bring them together in that ultimate act of connection with one another. You say, Paul, again, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I'm 72 years old. Okay. So I say this. Sexual expression may change with time. You may have to find new and different ways. However, sexual affection should not ever change. It should be growing and increasing with the years. That there's still the desire to connect with each other and to show that connection to each other, even though with time and aging and a host of other factors, they may mutually decide that we'll just have to go about it differently than we did when we were young. But the affection is the key. So, we gotta hurry here. Sexual intimacy is one of the defining characteristics of the unique union established in the declaration of a wedding vow, resulting in the exclusive arrangement of a marriage. Just think with me here for a second, I'll explain this. Sexual intimacy is one of the defining experiences that uniquely separates your relationship with your partner from every other human being on the planet. Do you understand what that's saying? Is that when a man and a woman stand at an altar and they make a vow in front of witnesses and most importantly before God, they are making a vow that from this day forward, our relationship will be uniquely different from any other relationship I have in life. And one of the things that looks uniquely different from your relationship with any other person is the permission to share sexual intimacy with each other. Did you follow that? So why are you telling me this? Because then the couple who isn't pursuing and nurturing sexual intimacy, you have to ask yourself the question, what makes our relationship unique anymore? Pretty soon, we are living lives in the same house where we have a relationship that looks like every other friendship I have. And God intended more for the marriage of a husband and a wife. Okay? Do you follow that? All right, so now let's go to the second one. You ready? I got like 10 minutes, so I'm doing this, all right? All right, here we go. One of the biggest mistakes most every couple makes in their marriage is when they neglect being partners for being parents. Do you hear me? One of the biggest threats to marriage is children. Now, are children bad? Not at all. They're a gift from God. They were designed to enhance our life. However, when our focus, our energy, our initiative, our time, our money, everything is directed toward our kids at the expense of our relationship with our partner, something's wrong. It's out of balance. It's no longer healthy. Oh, but kids, I only have a few years with them. I'll be with him for the rest of my life. I only have a few years with them. No, see. That kind of thinking leads to all sorts of problems because what happens is the longer you neglect your spouse in favor of your kids, there comes a day when your kids leave and now you're living with a stranger and you're supposed to have a relationship with them and now you don't even like them anymore. That's not what God intended. Couples who focus only on being a dad and a mom at the expense of being a husband and wife, they wake up someday to find themselves sleeping with a stranger they've been married to for years. Folks, what we have to understand is partnering and parenting are completely different skill sets requiring distinct motivations, initiatives, and activities. Do you get that? So again, a metaphor. Be really careful how I say it. Metaphor. So marriage, husbands and wives, it's a fire. Ready for a quick tutorial on how to build a good fire? This is free, okay? You need fuel, you need a heat source, and you need oxygen. Okay? So a couple, they have to nurture this fire. What happens as a fire burns, the more oxygen it gets, the more fuel it goes through. So you have to keep putting fuel on the fire in order for the fire to thrive. There's a catch. Being a parent is a fire. Big fire, bonfire, raging fire, okay? Especially when you start having 3 and 4 and 5 of them, there's a big fire, all right? And it requires a lot of fuel, a lot of time, a lot of attention, a lot of energy. Oh, but wait a second. I got this other fire. It's called a career, and it needs to be tended, and I need to feed it in order for me to move up the ladder so that I can take care of these kids. And then, church is a fire. I need to do that thing because, well, I answer for that, and God's a part of that, and I better do a good job tending this fire. And what happens is that for so many people, they end up spending all their time and energy tending this fire and maybe even this fire, and they go, well, that fire, that one can wait. And by the time they get back to try to tend this fire, there's like this little ember still left, and it's fighting to survive. And sometimes you can't get the fire to start again. And what God's trying to get us to understand is the single most important fire, if you're married, is this one right here. Because if this fire doesn't thrive, neither does this one. And if this fire is allowed to thrive at the expense of that one, you're burning down your life. You got it all wrong. For a couple, this is the most important fire, and you have to develop and nurture and tend it. And it's a completely different set of experiences than what it takes to do this one. This one, it requires time to hold hands and to go for walks and to have laughs and to have a song. To go out to dinner and quit being a mom and dad for a couple hours each week so they can just be husband and wife. This is the fire that you need to tend to. Does that make sense? So what do we got? We've been on this topic now for a month. We got this, how a couple negotiates different preferences reveals a lot about the amount of respect they have for each other. How they navigate the tension of stressful situations reveals a lot about the level of trust they have for each other. How they manage their finances reveals a lot about the level of unity that they have in their marriage, like pulling together in the same direction. And how a couple nurtures the energy for intimacy reveals a lot about the depth of commitment that they have to each other. Sexual intimacy is a barometer, and it indicates what the weather is like in your marriage. You want to have a healthy, strong, thriving marriage, it's going to take respect, and it's going to take trust, and it's going to take unity, and it's going to take commitment. That's what we want for you in your marriage. One of the words that we always use when it comes to marriage is the word faithful. It's probably second to the word love. But there's an assumption, an operating assumption that marriage is about being faithful. Faithful, it's about being dependable, and it's about being trustworthy, and it's about abiding, it's about being committed, that my partner should be faithful to me. And we have an idea of what unfaithful is. It's just that we have a very small understanding. For most people, unfaithful is to have an affair. But there's so many different ways to have an affair. You can be unfaithful by abusing your spouse, because that's not what they made a vow for. If you're abusive to your spouse, you're being unfaithful to them. If you're involved in pornography, you're being unfaithful to your spouse because you're finding sexual satisfaction in somebody other than your partner. Your career can become an act of unfaithfulness because suddenly it's more important than the most important fire. Hobbies. Hobbies are a way to be unfaithful. Time and energy and money spent in a direction that isn't helping to nurture this fire. Doesn't mean you can't have hobbies. You just have to be careful the amount of time and energy that you spend on them. Family and friends can become a threat to your faithfulness to your spouse. An addiction is being unfaithful, especially for the person who doesn't pursue the help to try to get better and healthier about their addiction. Because now your spouse has to carry you and the kids. That's not how marriage was intended to work. Distance, couples living emotionally separate from each other, that's an act of unfaithfulness. That is not how God designed the marriage to work. Neglect, it's unfaithful. All that to say this. A lack of intimacy between a husband and wife is an expression of unfaithfulness if that lack of intimacy has not been mutually agreed upon by both husband and wife. The couple who's not experiencing a mutually agreed upon expression of sexual intimacy, they're not honoring the act of being faithful to their marriage. Does that make sense? As we close, I want to just take a few minutes and kind of slow down, take a deep breath. We've learned a lot this month. We've learned a lot today to think about. I just want to bring you back to faithful. But most importantly, I want to bring you back to the faithfulness of God. If you're here today and your marriage is all broken to pieces, I'm telling you, there's a faithful God who can help you if you'll choose to follow him and his ways. If you're single here today and you're thinking, it's never going to happen for me, and you're tempted to go off and do some things to short circuit God's design for your life, I'm just telling you, God is faithful to meet your needs. His will is the best way for you to go about your life. To ignore it is to break your heart, to put your life at risk. God is faithful and he will honor his promises to you. If you're here and you're widowed, you've lost the love of your life, I want to remind you that your God is faithful. He's with you. He understands your needs. He's committed to loving you. If you're here and you're married, I'm telling you that your greatest hope is in the faithfulness of a loving and gracious God. So I just want to give you a minute. You talk to God the way that works for you about what you've learned this month or today. Just talk to God.